My responsibility lies in the fact that I bring ideas from the market to our R&D department, and new ideas from R&D I bring to the market. So I'm at the connection point between commercial and technical. This is a technical presentation about replacement materials for cobalt, which is my main activity at the moment. So thank you for attending. The agenda for my presentation will be, I'll give you a brief update on cobalt legislation. I will explain to you NuReact. NuReact is the brand name for our cobalt-free products. I will explain a few products in more detail. They're numbered here as NuReact CF12, 13, 31, 32. That does not mean much to you right now, but at the end of the presentation you will have a good feeling of the capabilities of the product and also why we believe this is an excellent replacement for cobalt. I'll explain to you how you choose the product that is most fit for your application, the NuReact of choice, as I call the chapter. And I'll show you some test data as well in 4mm laminates, standard laminates cured with standard MEKP. And I'll come up to a conclusion at the end of my presentation. The conclusion basically is that there is a change in legislation for cobalt, and I advise everybody to, well, take example in what AkzoNobel is doing. We are a cobalt supplier in the market, and we see that cobalt is reclassified soon. And we believe that we have to be prepared for the future, a cobalt-free future. And so we basically, well, call upon you to say, consider cobalt replacements and not wait until the last moment. And we believe the moment is right now. I have to speak a little bit slowly. I discussed with the translator, so I hope that you can follow my story. If it's too fast, then she will wave at me for sure. CMR classification. CMR is an abbreviation for carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic. That's a group of, let's say, problems with products that make the product a CMR product. It's CMR classified then. And the classification what we talk about is cobalt carboxylates. That's cobalt octoate, cobalt 2-ethylhexanoate, these kind of materials. And they're used as paint dryers, most of all. But we are using them as well in our UPR resins to activate the ketone peroxides. And if we have to work without cobalt carboxylates, then we have to obviously have an alternative in place. The situation with the cobalt carboxylates as follows regarding classification. At the moment, already cobalt salts are classified. Cobalt chloride, cobalt acetate are already CMR classified, carcinogenic 1B. That's a severe classification, which basically forces you to store the material separately, to work in a protective environment, to keep track of people using the material. It is a very heavy classification. People do not want to work with a CMR carcinogenic 1B product. Cobalt salts are not the same as cobalt carboxylates, because cobalt chloride and cobalt acetate can easily diffuse through the skin and cause their carcinogenic harm there. Cobalt carboxylates have a longer tail. Basically, it's a soap kind of material, and they penetrate slower through the skin. So at the moment, it's not yet classified. In December 2010, the Cobalt Consortium, which is basically a group of companies manufacturing cobalt, brought their tox data to the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, or ECHA, what you call it. And they have to decide, based on the tox data, what the classification of the cobalt carboxylate should be. The data that were handed in December 2010 was incomplete. It was a small skeleton dossier with limited tox data, and ECHA was unsure what to do with the information. They couldn't immediately decide. But they have 3 years to decide. So December 2010, by the end of this year, actually they have to make their decision. In August 2012, the first initiative was taken by ECHA to ask the Cobalt Consortium to reclassify their cobalt-based materials to reprotoxic category 2. Reprotoxic is already CMR classification, but reprotoxic category 2 is not as bad as carcinogenic 1B, but it is a big step towards reclassification of cobalt. This happened last year. For products containing more than 3% cobalt carboxylates. And that is for a range of products in the resin manufacturing, that is the case. Since then, we're waiting for ECHA to decide. They still haven't decided. They need to conclude whether extra tox data are necessary or whether they can take a read-across approach based on cobalt chloride and cobalt acetate, for example. The situation is such that 2 weeks ago, the National Toxicology Program in America released a document on cobalt metal, clearly classifying the product as being carcinogenic. So at the moment, ECHA has basically enough evidence to prove or to classify the product to carcinogenic, but they have to digest the information, and we assume that beginning of 2014, they will come to a classification of cobalt carboxylates to carcinogenic 1B. The implications for the users will be that they will have to monitor, they have to put the material in separate storage, monitor the use, have protective environment, protect the people that work with the materials. It will be a very difficult thing to do. It's possible, but there's a big cost attached to this. And we basically say move away from cobalt because it remains carcinogenic. And whether you protect yourself, it will still be in your end product, it will still be in the waste streams. So it's best to move to something cobalt-free. That's what this presentation is about. The products we believe are good candidates to, let's see if my pointer works. Nope. The products that are working in the same way as cobalt are the group D materials. They're in the middle of the periodic system. They have the possibility to change valency 2+ to 3+. They basically can do the redox reaction. Well, you see several chemistry, chromium there, vanadium, nickel, zinc as well. They are not circled because they have a heavy classification already. The products which we believe are good alternatives for cobalt are manganese, for example, iron, and copper. Copper is already used for many years in anti-fouling resins for boats. It has been subject to discussion for many years, but never classified. Copper seems a safe haven to go to. Manganese is with a dotted line, because it is probably within 5 years' time also subject to reclassification. So it's possible to use it, but maybe not ideal. Iron, on the other hand, is in our hemoglobin. It's in our blood already. And the product performs very well as an initiator as a replacement for cobalt. So we have, at the moment, 5 products on the screen. That is copper-based materials, Nurex CF12 and CF13, 2 copper-based. One is iron-based, Nurex CF30. I'll explain later what it is and what it's used for. And we have metal mix accelerators, Nurex CF31 and 32. For those interested, the name Nuri is an old family name of our company. It was founded in Deventer in the Netherlands some 150 years ago, starting with benzoyl peroxide. And one of the founders was the family Nuri. So the family Nuri is honored in some of our product names, and also here the family Nuri is coming back in our portfolio. And ACT speaks for itself. It's an activator. And the idea, our philosophy of the accelerator package that we make, the product itself should be mixed in the cold resin. There's no need to cook them in or to prepare them in your resin. You can just take the cold resin, mix them in, and use them for your processes. Straightforward end-use application. The application of the various replacement products, the 2 top ones are copper-based, are basically suitable in all applications as long as it's ambient temperature curing. That's important because at elevated temperature curing, it seems that the copper-based materials are slowing down and becoming not so good to use, but at room temperature, they work very similar to cobalt. The top one is a particular one. It has similar stability in the resin. When premixed in the resin, there's a gel time drift noticed in cobalt, and the same is noticed with Nurex CF12. So in that sense, it's an exact copy in performance as cobalt. Nurex CF13 is a different copper variant, and it has a better stability in the resin. It can actually be used to pre-accelerate resins, and you can store them for a much longer time than you can store cobalt. So even if you're not looking for a cobalt replacement, you can still enhance your shelf life stability of your resin by switching to copper. The iron grade is typically developed for agglomerate stone, what we call these Breton slabs process. Italian Breton making this machinery, slabs, and they are cured at elevated temperature, 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, with a tetramethylbutyl peroxybenzoate, for example, trigonox C, as we call it. And the Nurex CF30 is an exact replacement product for that application, particularly for that. Elevated temperature application, similar stability as cobalt. So the pot life in that application is important. It's the same for cobalt and CF30. And that market is already very advanced. They're working on CF30 already for 2 years, and they're close to bringing the product to the market. Nurex CF31 and 32 are metal mix, so that's a combination of iron, copper, and manganese, because we believe all three metals have their own advantages, so we put them all three in. And the application is very wide. All applications, actually, especially the CF31, with a temperature range from 20 up to 90 degrees Celsius. So the operation window is very wide. It has a better stability in the resin, and the same we see for Nurex CF32, which is the same type of approach, metal mix accelerator. All applications, but at the room temperature curing, and it also has a better pot life stability compared to cobalt. The choice of product, I think, is important. If you look at the various applications, I listed them all up. Ambient temperature curing, elevated temperature curing in 2 groups. Actually, that's the middle part is cured with standard MEKP, whereas the other elevated temperature curing is done with tetrabutyl peroxybenzoate, for example, the agglomerated stone slabs process. Filament winding, discontinuous, food silos, for example, and also room temperature curing of pipes, for example, discontinuous. I grouped them in the same group as polymer concrete, which is ambient temperature curing, casted, highly filled systems. Agglomerated stone blocks, that's also Breton, but then it's the big blocks curing at room temperature. Hand lay-up, spray-up, and resin transfer molding. This is all ambient temperature curing. The product portfolio to replace cobalt is wide. 2 copper ones, 12 and 13, but also the metal mix accelerators are very suitable in these applications. So you have choice of 4 products at the moment. Elevated temperature filament winding continuous, so that's elevated temperature. For example, the flow-tight process, to mention one. The Drostholm continuous manufacturing of pipes is elevated temperature curing. Centrifugal casting, company Hobos, for example, does similar process like that. And the CTEC process at flow-tight, for example, that's centrifugal casting. Continuous lamination speaks for itself. Let's say a very broad pultrusion type process to make clear sheets. And resin transfer molding at elevated temperature, which is obvious. Nurex CF31, in our opinion, is the product that works best in those applications. For every application, we looked at customers in the market which are leading their markets. And we are approaching those customers and we're asking them, and that's happening in the last 2 years, to prove that our products are working. And in polymer concrete, we are at the point that we can actually say this works. And we have an article prepared for the reinforced plastics regarding polymer concrete to prove to you all, like I say today, that this is a working system for everybody to be used. The same for filament winding on a continuous basis at elevated temperature. This is a huge segment in Europe. Approximately 30% of the overall market is dedicated to making of pipes, Middle East, for example. And this is an important segment, and we are trying to prove that Nurex CF31 works well in that application. And that's progressing very well. Hand lay-up, spray-up, and RTM. Room temperature, elevated temperature was in an article in January in the reinforced plastics. That already works very easily. That's not a very complicated process. I'll show you later on some more products that are made. Agglomerated stone blocks, these are big blocks. The market is the greasing market, so we're having no focal point there, but we are approaching customers to test it as well. And the agglomerated slabs process from Breton. They are working on this for over a year now, and they have a working system in the laboratory right now. It's under secrecy, so it's up to them to reveal how they do it. But I've been informed that they are very successful with Nurex CF30. So it will not take long, and we will be approaching also the Breton licensees with this application and the use of Nurex CF30 as a replacement for cobalt. Important to say that we've done a lot of testing. Thousands of 4mm laminates we've made using standard resin groups, so to say, standard medium reactive ortho resin, high reactive ortho resin, phenylester resins. We've tested in DCPD, iso resins as well, but we picked just one common grade from the marketplace, and that we tested with several peroxides, standard MEKP, acetylacetone peroxide, camyl hydroperoxides, and various others at ambient temperature and at elevated temperature. Thousands of laminates we made. So we know quite exactly how our products perform in the resins we tested. If you would buy resins on the local market, then they will not be exactly the same as the resin we have tested. So you would have to check and fine-tune in your own process that what I say here is true. We have done various checks and we are confident to say it is usually okay, but I can imagine that there are resins which are differently manufactured, giving different performance. So that's a disclaimer that I put on my slide here. An example for company in Holland, company NPSP, is a relatively small company, but they have a very standardized RTM process, picture on the side, and they make, for example, a chair like this with a various thickness of 4 to 8 millimeter, a very common type of thicknesses for RTM. They're using natural fibers in this case, which is typical for them, but you could as well use glass fiber. DCPD resin, Nurex CF12, plus a little bit of inhibitor, standard inhibitor, tetrabutylcatechol, to extend the gel time up to 60 minutes. Butyrex M50, medium reactive MEKP, and they're making these chairs already for a year now, and they're doing this very successfully. So there are cobalt-free products on the market already, although legislation still has to start next year. Polymer Concrete. It's a company in Holland, slightly bigger than NPSP, and they're making these door sills, but also facade panels and construction panels for the building industry. Thickness is 20 up to 80 millimeters, so also very thick parts they make, using Nurex CF13, Butyrex M50 as a standard peroxide, 80% filler degree, so the problem of absorption and peak temperature reduction because of the solid fillers has been tested here as well, thoroughly. Gel time approximately 7 minutes, and the product is commercially available already. So this is what we have in the marketplace at the moment. For those technical people in the audience, I'll show some reactivity data just to prove the reactivity numbers. Standard medium reactive ortho resin, for your reference, DSM's Palatal P4, for example, just to make a comparison. Butyrex M50, standard MEKP. Accelerator NL49P, that's a 1% cobalt solution. That's the comparison product that we use. Nurex CF12 and CF13, slightly increased dosage to give good numbers here. If you reduce those numbers, then the gel time will be slightly longer. Here you can see that it's slightly faster than cobalt. The time to peak is half, so that could be too fast, so you can reduce the amount of accelerator. And the peak exotherms are below 100. 90 could still be too high, depends on your process. So you can reduce it by reducing the amount of accelerator. Barcode development, obviously much faster than with cobalt. Residual styrene levels are slightly lower. If you reduce the amount of intake, then this number will be 25, slightly lower, and then after 2 hours you will reach the 50. So the system will always be faster than cobalt, and it's cobalt-free. So this is a comparison slide between the new products and the old products. Nurex CF31 and 32. Here we kept the intakes the same, 1 PHR, so 1 part per 100 resins, and Butyrex M50 as standard curative. Gel time, as you can see, 30 minutes for standard cobalt, and faster for the iron, let's say the metal mix accelerators. Also the time to peak is faster, the peak exotherm is slightly higher, and as you can see, the barcode development on these intakes are faster than with standard cobalt. And the final barcode hardness is the same as with cobalt. That's what you want. Residual styrene levels are slightly higher in this picture. That is in reality also the case. The accelerators are in some applications less efficient, and they lead to somewhat higher residual styrene levels that can be fixed by increasing the peak exotherm So that is something that needs fine-tuning. It also depends on the resin that you're using. Some customers find lower levels. We found higher levels. This needs to be checked in everybody's process when you start testing these materials. '80 degrees Celsius, curing at elevated temperature is really important for most customers because they want to have faster RTM system, for example, and they would use Trigonox 44B, acetyl acetone peroxide, in combination with cobalt because they believe that's the fastest system. It's true. Acetyl acetone peroxide are the fastest peroxides that are available in the marketplace. At 80 degrees Celsius, a gel time of less than half a minute is possible, with a time to peak almost 3 minutes and a peak exterm 170. Very fast, nice. Barcol is very quick, of course. Within an hour the product can be demolded, but probably within several minutes already. But that number is not here. And residual styrene level, 1.3. 1.3, keeping in mind, if we compare this to Butanix M50 and do the same experiment, we see that the gel time is slightly slower, but the residual styrene level is lower. So what you really want is and the fast curing of the acetyl acetone and the low residual styrene level of the Butanix M50. And if we switch to cobalt-free, then you can see with standard Butanix M50 and 1 PHR Nurex CF31, you're actually reaching the same speed as with acetyl acetone peroxide, and at the same time have the low residual styrene levels. CF31 at elevated temperature performs really efficient and fast at the same time. If you would stick to using Trigonox 44B, because you used to do that for the last 20 years, you can still have a good cure. Gel time 0.4, slightly slower, but still acceptable. But you'll see that your residual styrene level will go up. Still better than in your old system, but much better would be to switch away to standard MEKP. So the low-hanging fruit, so to say, at this experiment that we've done in a standard 4mm laminate is a 44B plus cobalt. Could be replaced with Butanix M50, standard MEKP, and Nurex CF31. I would say it's an option to consider. It gives better performance. It is cobalt-free. And on the price, I cannot judge, of course, but I can imagine that Butanix M50 or standard MEKPs have a price advantage over Trigonox 44B. And that's something you could consider when you're switching to cobalt-free, that you can also improve your process and reduce your cost. The question that you might ask if you're not interested in switching to cobalt-free because legislation is not there, can I benefit from the new reacts in another way? Can new react outperform cobalt? And the question is yes, in many cases it can. If you're looking, for example, to the sensitivity to water, if you're working with natural fibers or wet fillers, or your glass has been standing in the rain, or you have chalk that you're trying to use in your process, but it's wet because your supply didn't dry it sufficiently, you find undercure because you're using cobalt, and the cobalt gets hydroxide, but it's the cobalt hydroxide formed in contact with water. Your curing will be very slow, if not happening at all. If you switch to new react, in such a case, you would have perfect curing because new react is insensitive to water. You can actually add water, 2 to 4% to your system, and still have proper curing. You could save on your resin demand there. You have to check your mechanical properties, obviously, but it clearly shows that new react is insensitive to water, and you can have good curing still. Low peak exotherm. I know that customers are using special peroxide mixtures with the TBHP, for example, or Camille hydros to lower their peak exotherms. These alternative peroxides are very suitable in combination with cobalt-based system. But if you switch to Nurex CF31 and CF32, you can have proper curing and have your low peak exotherm, and at the same time avoid your cracks and have improved performance of your end product. Or probably you can work on a faster pace when you have lower peak exotherms. It's something to consider. Low residual styrene levels. I showed CF31 and CF32 being high in residual styrene. There are other process settings with other resins where you can clearly see that they are much faster and more efficient than standard cobalt. And the same is with NuReact CF12 and 13 at room temperature. You can reach very low residual styrene levels down to 0.1% if you like. And that could save you the post-curing step. So if you look for such an advantage to skip your drying step for your film materials or your post-cure step, it would be really worth to check the NuReact accelerators. Long gel times. Instead of adding hydroquinone or tetrabutylcatechol or other products, you can also use specific settings with the NuReacts to extend your gel time automatically. It saves you using, for example, a toxic material like hydroquinone and have a cobalt-free system at the same time. Low temperature curing, 10 degrees, that's what we've tested. We tested lower temperatures as well, but we have to consider that at some point in time, water in the systems becomes solid or the process becomes hard to repeat. 10 degrees is what we confidently put on the slide here. We know that CF12 and CF13 give good curing and good particle development at lower temperature curing. So that opens a bigger range and an operating window increases when you're using materials and cure it at lower temperatures. Phenylester resin, epoxy-based phenylester resin, we've extensively tested those. For example, the Derrecanes from Ashland are very known and used often in the marketplace, so that was our reference. If you're using another type, well, mind you, the chemistry will be more or less the same, but it's worth to check CF12 or 13 because the curing of a phenylester resin, epoxy-based phenylester resin will be very good with the copper-based accelerators and also with CF32. We are also testing, that's not on the slide, but it's interesting to mention, acrylic-based systems. Acrylic resins, chemically seen, relate to the phenylester resins, and also acrylic-based resins can be cured very well with the NuReact systems. At the moment, mostly it's cured with BPO amine. BPO and amine are both suffering from labeling as well, and there's possibilities to avoid those labeling by switching to NuReact and another peroxide. I will not disclose the peroxide right now because we are still working on the patent filing of the application, but we'll come back on this application soon. Again, this needs to be checked, of course, in your own raw materials. Whether your resin is the same as the one we tested is unlikely, so you have to test it in your own systems. We've seen a lot of customers testing it, and we are confident it will be fine, but I need to put it up the slide because what I consider good might not be good in your system, and also vice versa. We know customers testing with other resins, and they have excellent performance, whereas we would say that we didn't find it so good. So it's good to verify this in your own laboratories. This is my last slide. And basically I started with the conclusion in the beginning saying legislation for cobalt is on its way. We believe we should be prepared. We are cobalt suppliers ourselves to the marketplace. If cobalt gets classified, then we will see a decrease in sales of our cobalt. So we have to find an alternative for our customers. And while doing this, we also bring the NuReact, the cobalt-free accelerators, to the whole market to secure the fact that the thermoset market can continue. There's a good threat that customers might switch to epoxy or other type of resins, and that's something that is not in our interest, and it's not in the interest of the GRP industry. So we believe cobalt-free is the way forward. The additional benefits of the products are there already. So if you're not looking for cobalt-free, you can consider the additional benefits. So we basically recommend to ask for samples. Serhat Şen is here, our sales manager for Turkey. You can contact us anytime for sampling material and get started. I provide a lot of testing data and reference data in various resins, and also tell you which application products work and how they work, and to get you started. So that's basically my presentation. I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions then? Please.
Hi, Gökhan Çalışkan from Ege Kimya. Actually, I have a little bit of critique because in the beginning of your talk, you said that iron is a safe metal to use as an accelerator because it is already in the hemoglobin in our bloods. Well, cobalt is also in our body in the form of cobalamine, and deficiency of cobalt actually causes some irreversible damage on the nervous system. But the reason cobalt is toxic is that it is causing reactive oxygen species, and actually the very function of cobalt in the polyester is causing its toxicity because it's attacking the unsaturation on DNA and causing some DNA damage. And in polyester systems, it is first forming the free radicals, and then that leads to the formation of cross-linking, and there you go, you have the cured polyester. Now, my understanding of the issue is that anything that will cure the polyester should have, one way or another, has some threat to a system that is unsaturated like DNA, protein, or cell membranes. So my question is, did you do any toxicological testing on your products? Because I think if you're coming up with a new compound, then you're responsible for submitting a dossier in your REACH registration. And in the future, of course, every time you might be questioned for toxicological data that will come either from the market or other research institutes. So in this respect, how do you see the future of the new NuReact series? And did you do any toxicological testing?
Yeah, to answer that question, it's true what you're saying, because cobalt actually is in our blood as well, also in a complex formation. The cobalt that's been tested by the National Toxicology Program has to do with lung cancer, as much as I remember. And so it depends on how you look. Cobalt metal and the cobalt ions both have a different way of generating cancer, so to say. So you're perfectly right there. If you look at our NuReacts, we are using products in our NuReacts which are either REACH registered or will be REACH registered. At the moment, some products are not registered because the volume is very small, and so there's no need yet. It will be, I think, by 2018 or 2016, depending on the tier 1 or tier 2 products that we're talking about. So we're trying to use as safe products as we can. So to give you an idea, NuReact CF12, for example, is not just copper. There's also the additives and the various other ingredients to promote the product, because copper is known as an inhibitor in most Western systems. So we need to speed it up to use that. And the chemistry that we use to do that, we try to pick as safe products as we can, positively, let's say, on acceptable safety levels. There's no guarantee for now and for the near future even to say that the products we picked are the right products. The copper, for example, copper acetate, which is in our NuReact CF12, was quite recently reclassified. So that's pure pity for us, because it was one of the coppers we picked and it happens to be reclassified. Also, some of the additives and promoters that we're using, yeah, there could be, there is a chance that they will find reclassification. If you look at the CF31 and CF32, they are based on iron complex technology, so they are very tested, thoroughly tested already, and the synergists and promoters around it we consider safe. So your question is, are the
toxicological testing, like damage on DNA, etc., or?
What you're asking about mutagenicity tests, I would have to check that in detail. I can't tell you by heart what exactly is tested. It's a long list of tests, of course, that can be done on the products. But there's no guarantee that the product will be safe forever. We get REACH information every day that things are reclassified. So yeah, we pick the best we can.
I want to add, if I may, that I observed that the iron system works especially at elevated temperature, 50 to 90 degrees. With the copper, you have a temperature range of 20 to 50.
Yeah.
That is actually the organism's temperature, which is close to 37 or so. So with iron, you might be safe because it might not be activated at the low temperature side. But with copper, as you said, that like it might be activated already at the organism temperature. So I think that if you're offering something sustainable to the industry, I think especially at the testing level,
for higher temperatures, you would say. I think the link between, let's say, organ damage and the lower temperature activity, I think that link is maybe not fully justifiable.
Well, I think at least the base testing for that is that the very reason cobalt might be classified in the future, we don't know yet, like cobalt octoate or cobalt neodecanoate, etc., is that they show some positive tests on DNA damage, etc. So I think if we at least see those, then it might be a little bit convincing to use for at least the near future. Again, no one knows what's going to happen in the European Chemical Agency in the very far future. But at least covering those tests would be a little bit guarantee to the user.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's a suggestion. The link between operation temperature and the DNA defects, I think that's maybe a step too far. But because we have iron technology, which is also active at room temperature, we see that as well. And all of them can be made reactive at room temperature depending on the type of peroxide that you're using.
Right.
So I think the chemistry itself and the link to, let's say, the safety of the product is something for the reach to decide what's happening in the future. For the moment, we pick the best products that we have.
Right.
And in 5 years' time, I would nearly say, I guarantee we have another 5 products on the list that will have additional advantages and maybe even simpler products than we have now. But at the moment, this is the best we can do. And so let's see what this brings for the future then. Thank you. No questions? All clear? Thank you very much.